In 1945, a single bomb over Hiroshima settled an argument the entire 20th century had been building toward. Nuclear weapons weren't just weapons anymore. They were the price of admission to the table where the real decisions got made. 23 years later, 5 countries signed a treaty telling every other nation on Earth to stay unarmed. The United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, France, China. Every single one of them already had the bomb. One man looked at that treaty and saw it for what it actually was, not global security, but a monopoly dressed up as morality. His name was Abdul Qadir Khan. He sold nuclear weapons blueprints to 3 of America's most dangerous adversaries, then appeared on national television, apologized, and went home to his villa. No prison, no trial, not even a fine. The government that caught him gave him a pension instead. What you're about to discover goes far beyond one man's crime, because the answer to why that happened is exactly the same answer to why Iran is currently enriching uranium at 83.7% purity. Weapons grade is 90, and the world has largely moved on. This is unpriced risk. Everything made sense right up until it didn't. Pakistan called Khan a national hero. Western intelligence agencies called him the most dangerous proliferator of the 20th century. Both descriptions are accurate. Khan spent 5 decades proving that a rule written by the armed for the benefit of the armed wasn't really a rule at all. The question underneath this story isn't about Khan. It's about whether the original bargain was ever legitimate enough to hold. Because if it wasn't, everything that followed starts to look less like a crime and more like a predictable response to a rigged game. Here's the part almost nobody tells you. Iran's nuclear program was originally an American project, not a metaphor, not an influence, a literal American-funded, American-designed program. The United States sold Iran its first research reactor. American universities trained Iranian nuclear engineers. And in 1976, the Ford administration, with Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld in senior positions, was actively negotiating to sell Iran industrial-scale nuclear reprocessing technology. The same capability the West would later call an existential threat was, at the time, a gift Washington was trying to wrap up nicely for the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, America's closest ally in the region. Then 1979 happened. The Shah fell, and overnight, the identical program became a crisis, which is the backdrop for everything Khan did next. Because in 1975, Khan wasn't stealing blueprints from a military vault or a classified government bunker. He was a trusted metallurgist at Urenco, a perfectly legitimate European uranium enrichment company, showing up every morning to a low-rise industrial facility in Almelo, a quiet Dutch town that looked nothing like a place where history was being made. He had access to the centrifuge designs because his job required it, so he read them. He took notes. At some point, the exact moment isn't documented, he photographed them. Then he put the documents back, picked up his briefcase, walked out through the same door he came in every day, and drove to the airport. No alarm went off. Nobody stopped him. He boarded a flight to Islamabad and landed with the core of what would eventually become Pakistan's nuclear weapons program in his carry-on luggage. Western intelligence agencies had fragments of this picture for years. The documentary record on why nobody moved to stop it is thinner than you'd expect. The West built Iran's nuclear knowledge, then looked away while Khan quietly rebuilt it. The line between the rule makers and the rule breakers had never been as clean as the official story needed it to be. And then a war started, one that would make Iran's calculation completely different, September 1980. Saddam Hussein's army crossed into Iran and started a war that would kill somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people. It included something the modern world had largely agreed to leave in the past: chemical weapons, mustard gas, nerve agents, used on Iranian soldiers and on civilians. The West knew. The IAEA, the United Nations nuclear watchdog, knew. Washington was quietly backing Baghdad at the time, and the international response was silence. No serious sanctions. Nothing that actually cost Saddam anything real. Picture what that silence looked like from Tehran. Iranian soldiers dying from gas attacks that the entire international community could see, document, and condemn, and chose not to. The people running Iran's security apparatus weren't ideologues in that moment. They were watching a very specific lesson being taught. The world does not protect countries that cannot protect themselves, and they were writing it down. The calculation wasn't complicated. A country with a nuclear deterrent doesn't get gassed while the world watches. A country without one does. Around 1987, Khan's network made contact with Iranian procurement agents. What he sold them wasn't vague technical advice. It was a package, centrifuge designs, and component lists specifying the exact parts needed to build a uranium enrichment cascade. And, according to investigators who later examined the evidence, a separate document describing how to machine uranium metal into the specific geometry required for a bomb core. That last document had no civilian application. It existed for one purpose. Khan ran the operation through a web of front companies and middlemen spread across Malaysia, Dubai, and Europe. Less state espionage, more private nuclear consultancy, paying clients discrete invoices, no questions asked. Iran was one of those clients. The full shape of this only became visible after 2002, when Iran made partial disclosures to the IAEA, partly to get ahead of what inspectors were already finding, partly under European pressure. Those disclosures let investigators trace the network backwards, supplier by supplier, until Khan's name kept appearing at the center of every thread. Those centrifuge designs, the ones from Almelo, were, according to IAEA technical assessments, the basis of what Iran was operating at Fordo, a heavily fortified underground enrichment facility built inside a mountain near the city of Qom. A clock had been set in 1975. Nobody knew it was running. By 2003, it ran out, and what happened next was not what anyone expected. By 2003, the whole architecture was suddenly visible. A container ship called the BBC China was stopped in the Mediterranean. In its hold, centrifuge components, the kind used to enrich uranium, packed in crates and labeled as something else, bound for Libya. Investigators traced the supplier network backwards. Every thread led to the same address in Islamabad. On February 4, 2004, Pakistani state television ran a prepared statement. Khan sat in front of the camera in a dark suit, reading from a script. He said he had acted alone. He said he was sorry. He looked directly into the lens and apologized to the Pakistani people, to President Musharraf, to the nation. The broadcast lasted a few minutes. When it ended, Musharraf appeared and announced that Khan had been pardoned. Same day. Khan wasn't arrested. He wasn't tried. He was placed under house arrest in his villa in Islamabad, where he continued to receive his state pension. American and European investigators who wanted to question him directly, to find out exactly what he'd sold, to whom, and whether any of it was still circulating, were denied access. Musharraf said no. Washington accepted that answer. No extradition request. No aid conditions tied to full cooperation. The United States needed Pakistan as a staging ground for Afghanistan. That need was worth more than the full truth about Khan. The West pointed to Libya as proof the system had worked. Muammar Gaddafi, Libya's longtime dictator, surrendered his nuclear program, got sanctions relief, got rehabilitation. That was the official lesson. But Iran was watching a completely different data point. Khan had sold nuclear secrets to 3 countries, confessed on camera, and was sitting in a comfortable house in Islamabad, collecting a government paycheck. It was exactly like a bank robber who names his accomplices, says sorry into a camera, and walks out into the afternoon sun. The gap between what the West said it would do and what it actually did when the politics got complicated, that gap turned out to be the most important lesson Iran took from the entire episode. Not the centrifuge designs, the lesson. And Iran was about to use it. What Khan handed Tehran wasn't just blueprints. It was proof that the system could be gamed, and that gaming it carried no real cost. By the time the JCPOA was signed in 2015, the nuclear deal between Iran and 6 world powers that froze Iran's enrichment program in exchange for sanctions relief. Iran had been enriching uranium for years, and the argument Tehran made consistently wasn't that it wanted a weapon. The argument was simpler and considerably harder to dismiss. Why them and not us? Pakistan built a bomb entirely outside the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the 1968 agreement that told most countries to stay nuclear-free. It sold those secrets to 3 other countries. It faced no meaningful punishment. Israel sits on an estimated 80 to 400 nuclear warheads, never signed the NPT, and has never faced a single sanction for it. And yet Iran, an actual NPT signatory, a country that had formally committed to the framework, was being told that enrichment itself was illegitimate. Every argument Iran makes, sovereignty, deterrence, great power double standards, is the exact argument the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, France, and China made before 1968, before they wrote the rules that locked in their own advantage and quietly shut the door behind them, like a landlord who changes the locks, then writes the housing code. The JCPOA wasn't Iran backing down in exchange for goodwill. It was a temporary, verifiable pause traded for sanctions relief. Two parties who didn't trust each other, exchanging something verifiable for something conditional, with no way to address what had produced the standoff in the first place. The negotiators weren't solving the underlying problem. They were scheduling the moment it would resurface. In May 2018, Donald Trump withdrew the United States from the deal. Unilaterally, without a replacement. Tehran watched the agreement collapse from the outside in, driven by a party that hadn't even been the one to violate its terms. And then, methodically, Iran began to answer. What that answer looked like, and what the world did with it, is the part nobody wants to say out loud. Enrichment climbed to 20%, then 60%. Then, in early 2023, the IAEA reported uranium particles at Iran's Fordo facility measured at 83.7% purity. Weapons grade is 90. The civilian explanation for 83.7% is difficult to construct. Iran offered one. It hasn't been widely accepted, including by the IAEA itself. The world noted the report, and then, largely, moved on. A number that would have triggered emergency sessions at the UN Security Council in 2005 was absorbed in 2023 as a line item. No crisis, no ultimatum, just a finding filed quietly in Vienna. A.Q. Khan died in October 2021. He didn't live to see 83.7%. But the architecture he built, the centrifuge designs, the supplier network, the proof that a country could acquire the full nuclear fuel cycle outside Western permission, is still standing. The P1 designs are, according to IAEA assessments, the basis of what Iran is still running at Fordo today. The NPT's foundational question was never really answered. It was deferred. Why may some nations possess nuclear weapons while others may not? The treaty said, because we agreed in 1968 that those who had them would keep them, and those who didn't would abstain. Iran signed that agreement. Iran watched Pakistan violate its spirit without consequence. Iran is still, in some sense, waiting for a better answer than that. It hasn't come yet. A man who spent decades proving the rules didn't apply equally died in his villa. He never served a day in prison. The bomb he helped build is still there. The only question left, whether that bomb ever gets used, is one nobody in Vienna, Washington, or Islamabad has a clean answer to. And that's the part that should keep you up at night. Thanks for watching Unpriced Risk. See you soon.